This is Gemara Nazir Daf Chof Beis, and we're holding on Chof Aleph and Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom. The first one line is a Dechatos at the Tashema. If you're looking at your screens, you'll see that we highlighted the Shaila of the Gemara that we're in the middle of discussing, which started at the top of the Amud, about 8 lines down of Baal Mi Okar Oy Dilma Megas, guys. When a husband uproots his wife's neder, his wife's nazirus, a shayla that brings us back to Nadarim, does he uproot it back from the beginning? Or does he sever it from this moment and onward? And we started bringing numerous rayas, each one was deflected. And now we pick up about 10 lines to the bottom. The first word of the line again is Dechata Shemesu Bayalel Tamos Ta Shema. Says the Gemara one more time. Ha'isha she'nadra bin Nazir. We have a woman that makes herself a Nazir. And then what does she go and do? And she's drinking wine. She goes and she becomes Tameh. Says the Braisa, what is the status of such a woman? She gets Malkus. She's a Nazir, and she's drinking wine, and she's coming Tameh. So says the Gemara, Eichi Dami, what are the particulars of this case? If you're going to tell me that what's going on over here is that the husband did not be made for the neder, he didn't revoke the neder, then what's the chiddush? Of course, she's a Nazir, she's drinking wine, she gets malchus. Elabshita, what must the case be? The case must be that the husband was made for it, and still the chiddush here is that she gets a malchus. So says the Gemara, 1 second. And if when the husband uproots it, it goes back to the beginning and it severs it retroactively from the beginning. Why would she get malchus? There was never any naziris, and the fact she drank wine, the fact she became tameh, was nothing wrong with it. Ella says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, Shema Mina. We have a clear proof. Baal Megas, guys. Says the Gemara, must be that the husband severs the naziras from the moment and onward. Says the Gemara, a wonderful proof that the husband doesn't uproot the naziras, but rather severs it from that moment moving forwards. Says the Gemara, really, I'll tell you, Baal Me'ekar Akar. Says the Gemara, no, I could tell you that the husband uproots it from the beginning. But what's the question if you uproot it from the beginning? So why is it teaching me she gets malchus? Of course she gets malchus. You know why? Mishom de katani seifa, because the end of the brisa said, Heifer la baila, if the husband was made for the neder, a unique case. V'hila yada, she doesn't know that he got rid of the neder, and she goes and she thinks she's doing an aveira. You know what the halacha is? Even though you think you're doing an aveira, lamaisa you're not. So what's the halacha? The halacha is eina soifeges eser habayim. She does not get malchus. So because the end of the brisa discusses the case in which the husband was made for it, and you don't get malchus, so the beginning of the brisa taught a case as well. Tanya nami reisha soifeges, that she'll get malchus when the husband was not made for it. It's pashut if the husband was not made for it. Obviously, there is no malchus. Says the Gemara, you're right, it is obvious, but the chiddush that is taught in the seifa is the chiddush of this reisha is just to the seifa. That in the seifa there was a chiddush that she doesn't know about it. He was uprooted. He was made for the neder. There's no malchus. So the reisha teaches the case where there's yes malchus. So says the Gemara, no raya. And we continue on the top line, Chav Beis and Aleph. Tashema, says the Gemara, let's continue trying to bring a raya. Ha'isha she'nadra bin Nazir. We have a woman that made a naziros again v'nitmei, says she becomes tamei v'achar, and after she becomes tamei, her husband uprooted the neder. Her husband was made for the neder. What's the halacha? Says the Braisa. Mevi achata sa'if, ve'na mevi oila sa'if. What does she have to bring? A chatos and not an oila. Says the Gemara, why don't you have to bring one and not the other? If you're going to tell me that what's going on over here, that the husband severs the neder, severs in his ears from that moment and onwards, So then when she did the Aveira, when she drank the wine, when she became Tameh, what was the story? She was a regular Nazira. So now afterwards, the husband uprooted, who cares? What should she have to do? She should have to bring all the karbanos of a regular Nazir. So Elamai, so says the Gemara, says the Gemara, what's the other option? That the husband uproots it. The husband uproots it. Shouldn't have to even bring the chatas oif. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Hachanami. So says the Gemara, you're right. It's true that the case we're discussing is that she should not have to bring the chatos. V'amani Rav Elazar Akfar. This should hopefully sound familiar. You're right. The husband uprooted it from the beginning. And if the husband uprooted it from the beginning, there should be no affair at all. So why should she bring a chatos? Not because she was violated her naziros, but rather because the opinion of Elazar Akfar, the Tanya of Elazar Akfar, Oimer, says Elazar Akfar, 7 lines down, Matam Leimer, why does the Torah say, Asher chata nefesh, chibeize nefesh chata? Says the Gemara, what soul, what nefesh was there an avera against? Zel, and they said, Seer atzmai min hayayin. You know what? He didn't have avera. The mere accepting Naziros, says of Elazar Akfar, is an avera. Why? Because you pain yourself by not drinking wine. Nikra chayte, and that's the reason why you're called a sinner. Someone just says he's not drinking wine, he's called a sinner on the first white line of that he didn't have avera. So says the Gemara, again, we have no raya. So we're back to square one, trying to understand when a husband uproots the naziros of his wife, what is that status? Is it uprooted back from time number one, or does it sever it from that moment further? Says the Gemara, first white line, Chafez Amar Aleph, Tashema, Titanya Behedya. We learned explicitly in our Brayso, Isha Shenadra bin Nazir, a woman that makes a Nazir, V'shamachaverta ve'amra ve'ani. And a friend hears, says, I also am a Nazir. And then what happens? This should sound familiar, as yes, we had this in Gemara and Nedarim, I believe. The first husband comes, ve'efer la, and gets rid of the neder, the naziros of the first woman. So what's the halacha? He mutares, but the chaverta asura. Her friend is still asur. So what's the clear raya? Speaks out the Gemara. Shmam, we have a beautiful raya. Baal megas gayis. It must be that the husband severs it from that moment onward. Because if the husband was oikered all the way back to the beginning, then there would be absolutely no reason why the friend would still have naziris. Because the friend says that you're also what? You're also whatever that person is. But that person is nothing because it was uprooted from the beginning. So the fact that the friend still has a nazirus shows us it only gets rid of the nazirus from that moment and onward. Continues the Gemara, quoting the end of the Brayso, last line of Chafez Amar Aleph of Shimon Aimer. Im Amra Allah Hareini Kimoischa. Let's say the second woman says Hareini Kimoisech, I am like you. Then Shtei Mutaris. Meaning, if the second woman says Vani means I. Whatever you is I. So you're at this moment a Nazir, so I'm at this moment a Nazir. In a moment after you become not a Nazir, but that's from that moment and onward, and I'm still a Nazir. But if the second woman said Hareini Kimoisech, whatever you are, I am, then when the first woman's Nazirus is uprooted, or severed as Megas Gayis, it will uproot the second Nazirus at all, as well. And with that, we turn over to Chav Beis, Amid Beis. Says the Gemara, Mar Zutra Breid Rav Mari Amar. Says Mar Zutra in the name of Rav Mari. We just turned over to Chav Beis Amid Beis. Amar Hainu. Mar Zutra, one more time, Breid Rav Mari Amar. Hi. This halacha, Hainu de Rav Mari bar Chama, the same halacha as Rav Mari bar Chama. Tebai Rav Mari bar Chama. Harei alai kibasar zevach shlamim. If someone says, I'm accepting upon myself, I'm going to be like, someone's making something usher onto themselves, and they say it's going to be like a shlamim. What is the halacha? Ki mitvas inish bi karai matvis. Again, someone is holding an item and he says this item should be to me like the meat, the basar, of a zevach of a shlamim, a carbon shlamim. So what does he mean? Does he mean like a carbon shlamim, bi'ikarai matvis? It is the carbon, so it's aser. Maybe it means afterwards, after the shechita, after the zrika, after the whole avodah is done, then it becomes something that you could eat. So says the Gemara, says Amari, that this is the exact same halacha. But me answers the Gemara, no shaychis, me dummy. So give the Gemara like Kibsar Zevach over there. In the case of Rabbi Bar Chama, when he said it's like to me a carbon Zevach Shlamim Avagav Delachash and Nizrak Damai. Matzi Achalei, Bachot, Mikdash Kaddish. How could you compare the cases? In such a scenario, you're right. After you bring the carbon, after you do the avodah, you're right. You could eat the carbon outside the Beis HaMikdash, but yet the Mikdash Kaddish, it's still a carbon. Avalacha, in our case, Isal Gedaitach, if you're going to say, Bitznana Kamatvis, that you're pulling on the state right now, Haver Labaila, right now she's not a Nazir anymore, and therefore the other woman won't be a Nazir as well. Another way of learning is that the case of Naziris is the same thing, and we don't go with this Gemara's Dichoy explaining that there is a fine nuance of difference. And we continue, we're about 10 lines down, the two dots, and we continue the discussion that we just began, which was the discussion, what happens when one woman wants to make their Nazir's pinned on another one. So says the Gemara, Amra la hareini Nazira be'ikvech. So we ended off that brayso that said if she says I'm a Nazir like you, it might be different. So says the Gemara, what happens if the second woman turns to the first woman and says I am a Nazir be'ikvech, be'ikvayich, in your footsteps? Mao, hareini be'ikvayich, does that mean be'kula milsa v'sharya? Does that mean I'm in your footsteps like everything that you are v'sharya, and therefore when the first woman becomes mutter, so too does the second one? Or perhaps, or maybe she means, I'm in your footsteps before your husband came along and got rid of your Nazirs, Vasira, and you're going to be forbidden. So ask the Gemara, what does one saying, I'm like your footsteps, connote? Tashema, says the Gemara, let's bring a raya. Apologies that the highlighting is a little bit slow. Ha'isha shen nadra, about 15 lines down, the first one line is shen nadra. Ha'isha shen Nadra bin Nazir v'shama ba'ila v'amer avani. The case we had in the Mishnah. A woman makes herself a Nazir, the husband says an I as well. What's the halacha? Subsequently, eina yachal lahafer. The husband cannot be made for the Naziris afterwards. Says the Gemara, but if you're telling me that when someone says I'm in your footsteps, it goes back to the original state that they're talking about. So so the husband saying Va'ani says the Gemara should be no less than following the footsteps of your friend, and then what? And then the halacha should be he should be able to be made for her neder while keeping his subsequent Naziris alive. El alav, so says the Gemara, we want to bring a raya from here. That what? Shema mina b'kulei milsa matvis. That when someone says, I'm like Bekvayich, your steps, must be Bekula Milsa, that you're taking hold of the entire thing, Ve'olkach, and therefore, Hudlo Matzi Mefer, Ha'isha Damar, Eni Bekvayich, Hinami Mutaris. So the Gemara wants to bring a raya from the fact in our Mishnah we have a comparable case when someone says Va'ani to his wife Nazirus. What do we say in the Mishnah? The halach in the Mishnah was he's not able to be made for his wife's Nazirus. So the Gemara wants to prove to the case of Arini Bekvayich. Now the answer of the Gemara, which I'm sure everyone is anticipating and probably bothered, because we already saw this raya and the Gemara already gave this dichoy, says the Gemara, Loi, La'olam bi'ikara matvis. Really, I'll tell you that it is bi'ikara. Really, when you say Bekvayich, it is the same thing. But in this case, Kivan Damar la Va'ani, Ka'oimar Kayim L'chi Dami. Saying Va'ani is like you said, Kayim. It's like you're Mekayim his wife's neder. And therefore, V'michla Hakama Matzi Mefer V'loi Loi. Therefore says the Gemara, if you're shoyal on that which you did, then you could undo it. If you're not shoyal, then you cannot. Therefore there is no raya. Apologies that the audio and the video at the end of this year got a little bit messed up. Pick it up from the 2 dots in the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.